Good morning, dear students and teachers. My name is Енсепова A.S. I am an English teacher at Nazarbayev Intellectual School in October. Today we are going to have an online lesson on the topic Messages, Fact or Fantasy. This lesson will be devoted to reading fiction stories. You're welcome. Today you will read the parts of the story for specific information and details, predict what will happen, revise note-taking strategies, listen to the next parts making notes, and speak on the topic of dream. So, why do you think we dream? Do you believe that we should think carefully about our dreams and try to learn something from them? If you dreamt something you thought was an omen of good or bad luck, would you change your life accordingly? So you have to discuss these questions in groups. For this, you have 2 minutes. And if you want to know what I think about dreams, I try not to pay attention to them. My mother always told me that we have to interpret our dreams in a positive way, then we'll have good things in our lives. So, I hope that you have discussed the questions. Let's pass on to reading. You are going to read the first part of the story and answer the questions. The questions are: why was the narrator in Vladivostok? How did the narrator get into the man in the station restaurant? What impression do you get of the man that the narrator met? What do you think the narrator's profession might be? Okay, while reading, pay attention to these questions and try to find answers. So here's the text, the dream. Let me read the text for you. It chanced that in August 1917, the work upon which I was engaged obliged me to go from New York to Petrograd, and I was instructed for safety's sake to travel by way of Vladivostok. I landed there in the morning and passed an idle day as best I could. The Trans-Siberian train was due to start, so far as I remember, at about 9 in the evening. I dined at the station restaurant by myself. It was crowded and shared a small table with a man whose appearance entertained me. He was a Russian, a tall fellow, but amazingly stout, and he had so fast a punch that he was obliged to sit well away from the table. His hands, small for his size, were buried in rolls of fat. His hair, long, dark, and thin, was brushed carefully across his crown in order to conceal his baldness, and his huge sallow face, with its enormous double chin, clean-shaven, gave you an impression of indecent nakedness. His nose was small, a funny little button upon that mass of flesh, and his black shining eyes were small too, but he had a large, red and sensual mouth. He was dressed neatly enough in a black suit. It was not worn but shabby. It looked as if it had been neither pressed nor brushed since he had had it. The service was bad, and it was almost impossible to attract the attention of a waiter. We soon got into conversation. The Russian spoke good and fluent English. His accent was marked but not tiresome. He asked me many questions about myself and my plans, which my occupation at the time making caution necessary. I answered with a show of frankness, but with dissimulation. I told him I was a journalist. He asked me whether I wrote fiction, and when I confessed that in my leisure moments I did, he began to talk of the later Russian novelists. He spoke intelligently. It was plain that he was a man of education. So, we have read the text. Now let's check the answers to the questions. The first question is: why was the narrator in Vladivostok? Yes, he had been advised to travel from New York to Vladivostok as this routine would be safer. Good of you. The next question. How did the narrator get into the man in the station restaurant? As the station restaurant was crowded, they were sharing a table at a dinner time. Good, thank you. The next question. What impression do you get of the man that the narrator met? Yes, he was tall and very fat, and he did not look after his clothes. He was well educated, he spoke English well, and he could discuss literature. Next question. What do you think the narrator's profession might be? He says he is a journalist, but it's inferred that he wants to keep his real profession secret. He could be a secret agent, a criminal, an undercover police officer, or a politician. Good. Excellent job. Now, let's pass on to the next task. Find words in the story which means the following. A. Fat and solid looking, especially around the waist. B. A fat stomach, especially on a man. C. Yellowish and looking unhealthy. D. Old and in bad condition because of lack of care. E. Boring or annoying, causing a lack of patience. F. Concealment of the truth. So you can work at this task in pairs and find the words together. You have about 2 minutes. Okay, let's check. Fat and solid looking, especially around the waist. I am sure that you know it's stout. The next word. A fat stomach, especially on a man. Good. Paunch. The next word. Yellowish and looking unhealthy. Sallow. Good. Old and in bad condition because of lack of care. Shabby. Boring or annoying, causing a lack of patience. Tiresome. And the last word, concealment of the truth. Dissimulation. Good job. And now let's revise note-taking strategies. So these note-taking strategies are connected with listening and note-taking while listening. First, concentrate on the listening material. Take notes consistently. Take notes selectively. Do not try to write down every word. Remember that the average speaker speaks approximately 125 and 140 words per minute. And the average note-taker writes at a rate of about 25 words per minute. Translate ideas into your own words. Organize notes into some sort of logical form. Be brief. Write down only the major points and important information. Write legibly. Notes are useless if you cannot read them later. Don't be concerned with spelling and grammar. So these are note-taking strategies. I believe that you know all of them, just you recall them in your memory. Now, the next task is pre-listening prediction. So you have read the first part of the story, and what do you think will happen? Discuss in pairs. You have 1 minute. So as you listen, note down information about the Russian, the Russian's wife, the narrator's reactions to the Russian.
Objective Advanced, 3rd edition, by Felicity O'Dell and Annie Broadhead. Published by Cambridge University Press, 2012. This recording is copyright. CD 2. Track 1. Unit 13. Reading and Listening. Exercise 4.
By this time we had persuaded the waiter to bring us some cabbage soup, and my acquaintance pulled a small bottle of vodka from his pocket, which he invited me to share. I do not know whether it was the vodka or the natural loquaciousness of his race that made him communicative, but presently he told me, unasked, a good deal about himself. He was of noble birth, it appeared, a lawyer by profession, and a radical. Some trouble with the authorities had made it necessary for him to be much abroad, but now he was on his way home. Business had detained him at Vladivostok, but he expected to start for Moscow in a week, and if I went there, he would be charmed to see me. "Are you married?" he asked me. I did not see what business it was of his, but I told him that I was. He sighed a little. "I am a widower," he said. "My wife was a Swiss, a native of Geneva. She was a very cultured woman. She spoke English, German, and Italian perfectly. French, of course, was her native tongue. Her Russian was much above the average for a foreigner. She had scarcely the trace of an accent." He called a waiter, who was passing with a tray full of dishes, and asked him, I suppose, for then I knew hardly any Russian, how much longer we were going to wait for the next course. The waiter, with a rapid but presumably reassuring exclamation, hurried on, and my friend sighed. "Since the revolution, the waiting in restaurants has become abominable." He lighted his 20th cigarette, and I, looking at my watch, wondered whether I should get a square meal before it was time for me to start. "My wife was a very remarkable woman," he continued. "She taught languages at one of the best schools for the daughters of noblemen in Petrograd. For a good many years, we lived together on perfectly friendly terms. She was, however, of a jealous temperament, and unfortunately, she loved me to distraction." It was difficult for me to keep a straight face. He was one of the ugliest men I had ever seen. There is sometimes a certain charm in the rubicund and jovial fat, but this saturnine obesity was repulsive.
Let's check. The Russian. So you know it's about the Russian. He was talkative, he was of noble birth, a lawyer by profession. He had been in trouble with authorities, so he had to be abroad a lot. He had been doing business in Vladivostok. He would be in Moscow in a week. He was a widower. You know it's about the Russian's wife. Let's check. She was Swiss and spoke English, German, French, and Italian perfectly, and good Russian. She had taught languages at one of the best schools in Petrograd. And the narrator's reactions to the Russian. Check the notes. The narrator seems to have found it unusual that the man had told him so much about himself unasked. He felt that the man's question about whether he was married was a little too personal. The narrator was wondering, while the man was telling his story, whether he would have time to eat before his train left. The narrator found it laughable that anyone could laugh the man to distraction because he found him very ugly. Okay, good job. Let's predict. How do you think the story will continue? You have some time to discuss this question in pairs. or in groups. Okay, let's read the next part of the story and check. I'll read the text for you. I do not pretend that I was faithful to her. She was not young when I married her, and we had been married for 10 years. She was small and thin, and she had a bad complexion. She had a bitter tongue. She was a woman who suffered from a fear of possession, and she could not bear me to be attracted to anyone but her. She was jealous not only of the women I knew, but of my friends, my cat, and my books. On one occasion in my absence, she gave away a coat of mine merely because I liked none of my coats so well. But I am a man of an inequitable temperament. I will not deny that she bored me, but I accepted the criminal's disposition and no more thought of rebelling against it than I would against the bad weather or a cold in the head. I denied her accusations as long as it was possible to deny them, and when it was impossible, I shrugged my shoulders and smoked a cigarette. The constant scenes she made did not very much affect me. I led my own life. Sometimes, indeed, I wondered whether it was passionate love she felt for me, or passionate hate. It seemed to me that love and hate were very near allied. So we might have continued to the end of the chapter if one night a very curious thing had not happened. I was awakened by a piercing scream from my wife. Startled, I asked her what was the matter. She told me she had a fearful nightmare. She had dreamed that I was trying to kill her. We lived at the top of a large house, and the well round which the stairs climbed was broad. She had dreamed that just as we arrived at her own floor, I had caught hold of her and attempted to throw her over the balusters. It was 6 stories to the stone floor at the bottom, and certain death. Now answer the questions. What new information do we find out about the Russian's wife? A. She had an attractive figure. She said unpleasant things. And she valued her husband's possessions. Second question. How would you describe the relationship between the Russian and his wife? Her jealousy infuriated her husband. They both had bad tempers. Their relationship had become routine. So you have some time to discuss these questions in pairs, and we'll check the answers together. So what new information do we find out about the Russian's wife? I believe you know the answer. That is B. She said unpleasant things. The next question. How would you describe the relationship between the Russian and his wife? Yes, the answer is C. Their relationship had become routine. Well done. Let's pass on to the next discussion questions. What do you think is the significance of the dream? How do you think the story will end? So these questions can be answered by you. It's up to you. There are no right or wrong questions, just your opinions. Share your opinions in your groups. So the significance of the dream is up to the person who perceives the concept of dreaming. So some dream can have a good or bad omen for the person who sees, and the end of the story will have different endings. Okay, thank you. Let's pass on to the next part of our lesson. Listen to the end of the story and make notes on these questions. So here we have to think the answers to these questions. In what way did the dream prey on the Russian's mind? Had the Russian previously thought of murdering his wife? Did the dream change his wife's behavior? What was the second dream about? Why do you think the Russian was sweating when he told the story? According to the Russian, how did his wife die and who found her? What caused the narrator to doubt the Russian story? How do you think the Russian's wife died?
Track 2. Unit 13. Reading and Listening. Exercise 10.
She was much shaken. I did my best to soothe her, but next morning, and for 2 or 3 days after, she referred to the subject again, and, notwithstanding my laughter, I saw that it dwelt in her mind. I could not help thinking of it either, for this dream showed me something that I had never suspected. She thought I hated her. She thought I would gladly be rid of her. She knew, of course, that she was insufferable, and at some time or other the idea had evidently occurred to her that I was capable of murdering her. The thoughts of men are incalculable, and ideas enter our minds that we should be ashamed to confess. Sometimes I had wished she might run away with a lover. Sometimes that a painless and sudden death might give me my freedom, but never had the idea come to me that I might deliberately rid myself of an intolerable burden. The dream made an extraordinary impression upon both of us. It frightened my wife, and she became for a while a little less bitter and more tolerant. But when I walked up the stairs to our apartment, it was impossible for me not to look over the balusters and reflect how easy it would be to do what she had dreamed. The balusters were dangerously low. A quick gesture, and the thing was done. It was hard to put the thought out of my mind. Then, some months later, my wife awakened me one night. I was very tired, and I was exasperated. She was white and trembling. She had had the dream again. She burst into tears and asked me if I hated her. I swore by all the saints of the Russian calendar that I loved her. At last, she went to sleep again. It was more than I could do. I lay awake. I seemed to see her falling down the well of the stairs, and I heard a shriek and the thud as she struck the stone floor. I could not help shivering. The Russian stopped, and beads of sweat stood on his forehead. He had told the story well and fluently, so that I had listened with attention. There was still some vodka in the bottle. He poured it out and swallowed it at a gulp. "And how did your wife eventually die?" I asked, after a pause. He took out a dirty handkerchief and wiped his forehead. "By an extraordinary coincidence, she was found late one night at the bottom of the stairs, with her neck broken." "Who found her?" "She was found by one of the lodgers who came in shortly after the catastrophe." "And where were you?" I cannot describe the look he gave me of malicious cunning. His little black eyes sparkled. "I was spending the evening with a friend of mine. I did not come in till an hour later." At that moment, the waiter brought us the dish of meat that we had ordered. and the Russian fell upon it with good appetite. He shoveled the food into his mouth in enormous mouthfuls. I was taken aback. Had he really been telling me in this hardly veiled manner that he had murdered his wife? That obese and sluggish man did not look like a murderer. I could not believe that he would have had the courage. Or was he making a sardonic joke at my expense? In a few minutes, it was time for me to go and catch my train. I left him and have not seen him since. But I have never been able to make up my mind whether he was serious or jesting.
So let's check. In what way did the dream prey on the Russian's mind? The man began to think about the dream too. He realized his wife thought he hated her and could be capable of murdering her. When he walked up the stairs, it was impossible not to imagine the scene his wife had described in her dream and think about how easy it would be. Next question. Had the Russian previously thought of murdering his wife? No. He said he wished to be free of her, that she might leave him or die a natural death, but not that he would murder her. The next question. Did the dream change his wife's behavior? The answer is, for a short time, she became less bitter and more tolerant. What was the second dream about? The second dream was the same as the first. Why do you think the Russian was sweating when he told the story? So I think you have different interesting answers, but let's check with my version. Perhaps because the memory of the situation was so vivid, or perhaps because he had murdered his wife. Okay. The next question. According to the Russian, how did his wife die and who found her? She had fallen over the bluster and was found dead at the bottom of the stairs by a lodger. The next question. What caused the narrator to doubt the Russian story? Do you think that the narrator doubted? And do you have doubts by yourselves? Now let's check. He seemed nervous. He had a malicious, cunning look, and his eyes sparkled. The next question. How do you think the Russian's wife died? Did the Russian murder her, or was it an accident? We do not know it for sure, but this is the narrator's suspicion or nagging doubt. I think many of you also have doubts about the circumstances under which she died. So, we have some questions for discussion. Did you enjoy this story? Why and why not? Do you prefer short stories to have clear, happy endings? Or do you prefer mysterious endings so that you have to come to your own conclusion about what happened? So you have some time to discuss these questions in groups. If you want to hear my opinions about this story, I enjoyed this story because it makes me think what happened in reality, but I personally prefer short stories with clear, happy endings because maybe I'm a person who needs positive things, but it's up to you. People differ, and different people have different opinions. Okay, thank you. Good job. Now references. Course plan English grade 11 with NIS resources. Felicity Odell and Broadhead, Objective Advanced Students Book 3rd edition, Cambridge University Press, 2013. Felicity Odell, Annie Broadhead, Objective Advanced Students Book CD 3rd edition, Cambridge University Press, 2013. And the template was taken from www.themegallery.com. Okay, thank you for your attention, and I enjoyed the lesson. I hope that you've learned a lot in this lesson. So you know that we read fiction and non-fiction texts. Today our lesson was devoted to fiction stories. And you've revised some vocabulary and answered the questions, discussed the concept of dreaming. Thank you for attention, and you can have this lesson on http Moodle NIS Education. Goodbye.